Hello and salam everyone. We'll begin with a 15-minute summary of the book by Scott Jordan, and then we will proceed with answering of the questions by Dr. Ziauddin Sardar. So I'll introduce Scott Jordan. He is a writer, a philosopher, and a political scientist. He is the Executive Assistant Director of the Center for Postnormal Policy and Future Studies. He is also a deputy editor with the quarterly journal Critical Muslim, and he is the author of the book A Very British Muslim Activist, The Life of Ziauddin Siddiqui, and has authored numerous articles on Postnormal Times, a few that appear in the Postnormal Times Reader. He is currently based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where he is working on futures literacy projects with IIIT East and Southeast Asia. We're really excited to have him here, and Mr. Jordan, could you please start? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I want to thank all of you for organizing this and putting this together. It's wonderful to see so many people interested in the future, some of us against our will, I think, under the current circumstances concerning the pandemic and other social issues we're all facing all over the world. It's also interesting that we're talking about this book now as kind of what you could say is maybe the main article of the book that kind of got everything kicked off, was written 10 years ago. In fact, that was in February, so it's actually now over 10 years. And time's a very interesting concept, particularly with this book and with Postnormal Times. And when you were looking at the different articles, these articles have been written, some of the earliest ones that particularly are pertaining to postnormal sciences, were written in the 90s. So we're dealing with a significant disparity in time, but what's interesting is how the themes kind of flow through that, and also there's a certain repetition you might see. And so sometimes you have to think, oh wait, did that happen first, or when did this all happen? So Postnormal Times Reader is a reader. I'm sure some of you have seen other readers. Sometimes they may focus on a particular author. There are other ones that focus on ideas. And when we had put this together around 2015, 2016 is when we really started, maybe 2014 as well. There was a good year, maybe 2 years, and Zia could fill us in more on some of the details if you're interested in how the book came to be. But in just looking back then, only about 5 years ago, or about how much the world has changed, even how much the world has changed in just the last 6 months, I would say is pretty dramatic as well. And so usually the biggest challenge we have as people who are dealing with events that are occurring in what you'd call current affairs or happening in real time, you have this issue of, well, if I write something today, will it be relevant by the time it actually gets published? Or will it have already kind of passed into the past, as it were? And it's interesting how now, even though Postnormal Times was being discussed by Zia, 10 years ago, back when he was the editor of Futures, which is one of the bigger future studies journals out there, how it is just now that this is becoming more of a popular phrase and a popular idea as people are starting to associate the problematic concepts of normality in our current time. So in putting together the book, I think it's important you must keep in mind the vast amount of time that takes place between some of when these articles are written, but also look at the structure of the book itself. Some of these readers can be structured chronologically. That's the simplest way, I suppose, to put together a reader. Sometimes they may have key concepts or focus on one article and then every article that's kind of a response to that. We instead, and in every project that I work on with Zia especially, one of the biggest things we try to do is construct a proper narrative to bring the reader through the ideas. And that's a key thing that comes out of the Postnormal Times Reader. And as you're reading it, I'm hoping you caught on to the flow this takes you on. Yes, there is a chronology to it to an extent. We have to discuss the postnormal science aspects. And although it's not as explicitly stated, you kind of have to understand the future studies context that Postnormal Times derives from. The first major paper being Welcome to Postnormal Times, which is not the first chapter, oddly enough. You have to get to that to a certain extent so that you can get to this idea. But that in and of itself comes from nearly a decade of editing futures and Zia looking at the world and trying to make sense of things. And so sense making becomes a big theme throughout some of the post-normal times literature. But what's even more interesting is that then you get into, the sections are broken up into you have the origins and theories, some of the historical basis for how we get to where we're at. Then we get into the methods and the questions. And this is really where you're seeing a thought in action, which I don't think we get the chance to experience very much. When we read a book, especially a book that's on more thoughtful, philosophical ideals, the author is long dead and the idea has been around for who knows how long. But this is actually a living idea that's developing as you're reading it, which is even more interesting. And what's kind of neat about how the book, it focuses, of course, on Zia's works, and you have the typical, he makes the statement, welcome to post-normal times, he gets the criticisms, he responds to the criticisms, and then a theory develops in this discussion. And so the whole book itself is we use the term polylogue in post-normal times linguity, if you will, and polylogue is we'll think dialogue, but poly being two or greater. So something as many voices as possible can contribute to this discussion. And it's interesting because we're sort of simulating that polylogue currently in what we're doing here today. So the book then takes you kind of at the midpoint, it starts to break out and you see less and less of Zia and more of other people's voices. And so some other thinkers that have been kind of grappling with post-normal times over particularly the last 6 years, 6-7 years, also make their way into the book as well and start taking it in their own directions. And that's the beauty of post-normal times, because what Zia had done with post-normal times is take it from when Jerry Ravitz and Funktowitz were talking about this thing that was happening in science.
One or two things need to be pointed out. It is that we are not saying that complex societies did not exist in history. They certainly did. Whether they were Mayan or the Roman Empire, whatever, or the societies, even the societies of Pacific Islands, which are considered to be simple. In fact, they are pretty complex societies. But what we do know is that, or what we do learn from the study of these societies, is that as they become more and more complex, they reach a point of diminishing returns. And then things fall apart and then a collapse happens. So complexity is a very important element in the collapse of societies. A society that is not complex would not actually collapse, but some level of complexity is important, and both are important. If you have a complex society and you suddenly remove that complexity from the society, then the society verges on the point of collapse. But if you increase and carry on continuing to increase, becomes more and more complex, that too is problematic. As I said, it reaches a point where it's not worth talking about efficiency anymore. It's not worth talking about progress anymore. It's not worth talking about growth anymore. You cannot grow beyond that point, and it reaches the edge of chaos from which it can collapse. So that's the first thing. We're not saying the complex is unique, but we are in a situation where our societies are very, very complex. We are not also saying that contradictions have not existed in society before. But what we are saying that kind of a contemporary level of contradictions has never existed in societies before, the sheer level and quantity. Right? And we are also not saying that chaotic behavior are only limited to this period. That certain amount of chaos or chaotic behavior has not happened in history. But what we are saying is that we have never experienced the three together. The simultaneous occurrence of three, high level of complexity, high level of contradictions, and high level of potential of reaching the edge of chaos. That hasn't happened. And that is the result of the four drivers that I described, that we now find ourselves where things are globalized, where we can communicate with people instantly, not just one or two, but millions of people instantly, and the chances of feedback loops occurring are much higher than they've ever been in history before. So this is the time that we find ourselves in. If things continue the way they are at the moment, if complexity continues to increase, if there is more and more contradictions, there are more and more contradictions, we will reach a particular stage where we will either collapse as a society or we will move into a new order. So the challenge for post-normal times is to move to the new order without avoiding the collapse. That's the main challenge, because we know from history that once a society reaches the level that where we are, the high level of complexity and even more contradictions, and virtually looking at the edge of we are at the tipping point, almost at the tipping point. We need to now work out how we are going to avoid the collapse and create a new order. So post-normal times also provides us with an opportunity. There is two other things to be pointed out as well. When societies collapsed in the past, it was essentially a regional or, if you like, a civilizational event. When the Mayans collapsed, they were limited to a particular region. When the Roman Empire collapsed, it was the Roman Empire that collapsed. But if we have faced the collapse now, it will be a global collapse, right? It will impact all of humanity and the planet itself. And part of the reason is that in these post-normal times, we have extended planetary boundaries, right? There are 9 planetary boundaries, and 4 of them we have already extended, which includes climate change. We have exceeded, carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere. We have exceeded the amount of plastic and other rubbish we could possibly dump in the oceans. We have exceeded, we have exceeded the point where the glaciers, the ice is melting, the temperature is rising, and sea level rise are inevitable. So climate change is playing a very, very major part in this particular post-normal times. And the impact of human behavior on the planet is pretty evident. I mean, we can see that with the COVID-19 affairs. You can see how just in 3 months where we are forced to come to a standstill, the nature has returned. Pollution in the cities has dropped. For the first time this summer, I can really hear the birds where I'm sitting from. In fact, in some afternoons, the cacophony of birds is so much that I can't even concentrate. You can go out for a walk and not come back with lungs full of soot and other pollutants. Cities like Beijing or Bombay suddenly find themselves with much more clean air than they've experienced for the last 10, 15, 20 years. So the question of collapse then, and how do we go to the new order becomes very, very important. And that's an opportunity for us to think of what new paradigms do we need to move from there. I would argue that there are basically 2 or 3 things that essentially we need in this transition period if we are going to avoid some sort of collapse. One is the question of speed. We do need to slow down. And that's one of the kind of clear demonstration of COVID-19, is that slowing down improves the environment and makes things better in terms of potential chaotic events, although it brings in other chaotic events as well, the probability of economic collapse. So the contradictions are always there, and you have to try and resolve the contradictions. I think that's kind of one of the most important things, that we do need to learn to slow down. We do need to learn to deal with complexity. Our minds are not used to dealing with complexity. We like to have simple things and simple solutions. But in these complex times, we need to deal with complexity, because complex problems require complex approaches to tackle them. You cannot, I mean, this is a law, it's called the law of varieties. You do need complex approaches. So we have to learn to live with complexity and develop complex approaches to complex problems. And we have to learn how to transcend contradictions. I think this is a very important issue. Clearly, contradictions cannot be kind of resolved, especially if they're in most cases that they're not just contradictions of worldview or people not disliking or disliking, but in some cases they are profound logical contradictions in what we do. In Britain now, there's a major contradiction that the government is addressing, has no idea what to do, whether to save lives or to save the economy. If you save the economy, then you have to ask people to come out openly and go and shop, which they're nearly doing now, right? And scientists have already said this will increase the R factor, this will increase to more deaths, right? If they want to save life, then people have to go back in lockdown. There will be no economic activity of any kind, and economy will become worse. So there are logical contradictions like that, which we'll face more and more. In many cases, they can only be resolved through ethical and moral explorations. So ethics and morality become the key kind of guiding principles here. So in general, when we talk about post-normal times, we say that the solution to there are no real solutions to post-normal times, but there is a way of navigating it. We use the term navigating. So we're developing techniques and things how to navigate from where we are now to somewhere which is a higher order of society with more equity, with more justice, with more equality, with more kind of respect for nature. And the challenge, as I said, is how do we navigate to go from here to there without the collapse. If there are any questions, we can explore the ideas further. Lena.
So actually, we did receive a question on the Google form, and it was exactly the note that you ended on. How do we navigate post-normal times?
Yes. But that's the key question, and that is the question that we are working on. We spent a long time working on this question. How do we then navigate post-normal time? The two or three things I have said that we have to do. One is that we have to slow down. What do I actually mean by that? And that's an important area to explore. At this moment in time, we are not shaping technology. Technology is shaping us. It is leading us by the nose, right? And it is assumed that if there is anything that can be done technologically, it should be done. And in fact, in most cases, it is done automatically, right? If there is a technological progress to be made, it will be made without question, right? And this kind of perpetual kind of technological development, they are making things more complex, more interconnected, more liable to positive feedback. I mean, if you want to avoid a chaotic event, one of the first things you need to do is to cut the positive feedback. Once you cut the positive feedback loop, things begin to go back from the edge of chaos. And slowing down is one very, very good kind of reason for one very good example of how we can actually navigate. I mean, the faster we run, the more we'll be out of breath and more difficult it will be for us to do or say anything. So slowing down is in my opinion, very, very important. By the way, Scott, if you want to come in there, jump in. Don't. Yeah.
I suppose to add upon that, there is a certain to approach some of the issues that Zia has been underlying is you need to almost have a certain level of conditioning, an ability to be comfortable with. So I think part of that comes out of the discourse in post-normal times is becoming comfortable with the complexity of things. It's hard to think complex, which is what Zia had pointed out. And so you have to really sit back and kind of really map some of these things out, because then you really kind of understand, especially when you start looking at the various connections between smaller things. You can really, after a few minutes, you realize, oh, this is actually a lot more connected than I thought it was. I mean, the economy would be a big example of this, but I mean, when you think of all the different factors that go into that, and especially under COVID-19, we're learning new factors about the economy that some people may have been aware of, but now it's becoming much more apparent to us that there's this disconnect, particularly for if there are any economists with us, they can maybe talk about this further, but the idea that the market and the economy are two different things. And I think we often put them together because humans like simple things. We like to put things, what is the economy? It's the Dow Jones. But actually it's not. There's a lot more to that. And I think people are having to face that right now. But in order to get us to that, I think another key thing we should focus on is creativity and our own imagination. And so we might need to turn to people's opinions who we may not have turned to in the past. Scientists have to look to the artists have to look to the scientists. Politicians have to look beyond just technocrats and policy people. We need to bring more people into the conversation. So that would be my idea.
To continue the idea of slowing down, I mean, one factor that keeps speeding things up is this notion of growth and perpetual progress. The idea that there has to be a linear progress, we should continue, and the economy should continue to grow. And in fact, one of the limits we have reached is the limits to growth. In fact, this is not a new idea. This was Limits to Growth, the title of a book that came out in 1975, the first future-oriented, global report by the Club of Rome, as it was then known. So the idea of growth has to be really critiqued, and basically, it's not even a question of reducing growth, because even zero growth is too much at this moment. We are now consuming about 1.1 or 2, my figures may be wrong because it's been some time that I look at the figures, amount of resources that actually exist on Earth. So we are at this moment using more resources than the potential resources there are on Earth, in a sense. And if we continue growth, even at the rate of zero growth, then we will end up using resources of not just the Earth, but 3 or 4, we will need rather, not just the resources of the Earth, but resources of 3 or 4 planets. And if we continue to grow at 1 or 2%, and then we are talking about growth around the world, right? Then we'll need the resources of several planets. So it's not even a question of zero growth, it's a question of degrowth. We now to go back to not growing in a sense. And here we can take a kind of example from nature. A tree, for example, doesn't continue to grow, right? It reaches a stage and it knows that if it grows more beyond that point, it will end up destroying itself. So there is some notion of homeostatic growth we have to kind of return or go forward to some notion of homeostatic growth, which actually means profound changes in lifestyles, not just in what we eat and what we wear, but how we travel, and how we consume the resources of the earth, the technologies we buy, etc.
Thank you. Another question we had was, how does the COVID-19 pandemic add to your post-normal time discussion? Do you think any arguments should be revisited, or do you think that they have manifested?
That's a good question. I can tell you what COVID-19 has done. It has actually announced and removed all doubts. It has actually announced the arrival of post-normal times and removed all doubt that we are not in post-normal times. Because in earlier stages, our theory was criticized, and some of our colleagues, for example, from India, were saying, well, this is all very good, but this is what's happening in the West, but things like that don't happen in India. Well, they do, and they have been happening very rapidly, as we have seen in the last 5-6 years. So in fact, the COVID-19 has strengthened the theory. And suddenly, all our futurist colleagues who didn't quite disagree with us, but didn't quite accept post-normal time stuff, now suddenly post-normal times advocates, right? And we've been kind of inundated by all our friends and colleagues and networks saying, actually, I mean, one of my very old friend who was very kind of, because he has his own ideas, was not kind of too keen on it, actually wrote me saying, so you have been right all along. We are now totally in post-normal times. So no, it has basically enhanced our work. It has confirmed a lot of our ideas about the four drivers, our ideas about the 3 C's, our ideas about how we navigate this transitory period, our ideas which we have not written a great deal about. I mean, although I've actually mentioned it, that we need to move away from this growth and progressive ideology and move towards some sort of degrowth. That's become pretty evident. I mean, there are lots of people out there, for example, including climate deniers, who think that human activities do not have any impact on the planet. COVID-19 has actually physically shown that that is the case. That if we stop our activities, if we stop our economic activities, if we stop flying, if we stop going to work, for example, and doing all the things that we do, the environment improves. And it improves quite drastically and very quickly. Suddenly there are foxes out there in our garden, right? And a whole kind of paraphernalia of birds and all sorts of things we haven't seen. In terms of environment in Britain, it has been astonishing. I mean, the number of reports of this discovery of this species or this new thing or this particular species which was kind of endangered, coming back, etc., just in 3 months period. But imagine what would happen if, for example, we continue to lock down for 5 years or something like that. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying, imagine that as a thought experiment, right? What impact it will have. So the idea of Anthropocene is not just a theory. It's a physical fact. You can actually see that our human activities have an impact on the planet, on the ecology and geology of the planet, and on climate change. Right, and that's what post-normal times is all about, in a sense, and that's what COVID-19 actually teaches us, that we do need to change our behavior.
And to add to that, what's very interesting is how post-normal times, or with the COVID-19 pandemic, what we're finding is that it's not so much that suddenly we're in a whole new world and we don't know what to do and we don't know how to use everything's very alien to us. That's not the case. And what's interesting is that we've kind of been forced to slow down. So what we've been advocating is this idea of, we need to slow down and look at the deeper complexity of things and really kind of point out the contradictions. And what COVID-19 has done in a very odd way, it's kind of helped to put that stuff on Front Street for us, so we can sit back and just kind of see the way things are working. But it's not. I think what will happen is what was our first instinct when we went into lockdown, right? We had said, okay, so we'll do this, we're all in this together. We'll clap for the NHS and we'll support our frontliners, and then we're going to get through this, and we'll be done, and we'll move on with our lives, and we can get back to doing exactly what we were doing. And I think now, 2 months later, we're realizing, oh, maybe we do really need to take a step back and really rethink some of the things we've been basing all of our lives, our cultures, and everything off of. We need to rethink certain notions, rethink inequality, how we treat other human beings, rethink the values of, value as far as wealth goes, the value of human life, and really kind of readjust our priorities, and that there are deeper changes that need to occur. These aren't new notions. These have been being advocated for time immemorial, but we're now realizing that we're really at a breaking point, and that's, ready or not, there's the notion of the post-normal burst, which is in the Three Tomorrows paper chapter in the Reader. And we're kind of experiencing maybe not one, monolithic burst, but we're experiencing all these little bursts, and hopefully we're thinking about it and we're really putting our heads to the grindstone and figuring out a navigation, and not just how do we get to a new normal, right? Maybe normal was the problem, and maybe we don't want to get to normal, or what comes next needs to be different.
I think one of the realization is that the normal was the problem. Now, people have been saying that. The thing about COVID-19, it isn't teaching us anything new. What it is telling us is that the normal that we have perceived was a serious problem, right? And you can't really return to that normal. And even the new normal, if it's nothing more than appendages, a few appendages, then it's not going to cut it, right? We really do need to rethink and a couple of other things. For example, it's not just that we need to learn to appreciate complexity, but we also have to learn to embrace uncertainty. There's going to be more and more uncertainty. I mean, a complex system moving rapidly in a rapidly changing environment will generate uncertainties, right? All varieties of uncertainties. In the postnormal times theory, we have 3 varieties of uncertainties. I don't want to go into that, but the question is that uncertainty will increase, right? Even in the shorter period, COVID-19 has shown us that our personal lives are more uncertain than they were. If I go out now, I don't know whether I'm going to bump into somebody who's going to give me the virus, right? There's an added layer of uncertainty. Since I have not worked for the last 3 months, I don't know whether my job will continue or not, right? In this country and in some other countries in Europe, they are furloughing people. They're paying, but how long this furlough scheme is going to go? And I go back to my job, I don't know whether my job will be there or not, right? Even mega corporations are now laying off people because they have lost so much money. British Airways announced that it is going to shed 12,000 people. Today, another company has announced it's going to close kind of 600 branches almost every day. So the level of uncertainty, even in our personal lives, has increased. Forget the global picture. So we have to learn to embrace uncertainty, because we're going to face more and more uncertainty. But the other thing that we also need to learn to appreciate is ignorance. The interesting thing about postnormal times is that the more knowledge we have, the more ignorant we become. And that's one of the things about complex system, right, in a sense. And we have seen that with COVID-19. The epidemiology has existed for centuries. We've been researching diseases and viruses, hundreds and hundreds of research institutions. One new virus comes along and knocks the whole system, right? Everybody is ignorant about it. They use the word novel to describe it. Just because it's new, right? We had no idea how to deal with it, and the sheer contradictory advice. For example, I'm sitting in Britain, so this is what I'm looking at. This contradictory advice of scientists is mind-boggling. I mean, and the levels of ignorance associated with some of them. I mean, the main paper which eventually persuaded the British government to go into lockdown was actually written in C, in the computer language C, which I used to use when I did my during my student days, physics days in the mid-70s, right? I think it used C+, right? The calculations were done on C+, right? And it predicted that there will be 500,000 deaths if the virus continued to spread, and we went for herd immunity, right? And the scientists who had that paper would not allow other people to see it or have it reviewed, right? Because he was so uncertain of his facts. And one of the reasons it was revealed that it was written, if the calculation was done on a computer, that was probably Apple II or something, right? So I mean, the level of ignorance is very deep, and there's several layers of ignorance that we have to deal with. And every new advance generates a whole plethora of new questions that we have to deal with, that bring our ignorance out. And in some cases, the ignorances are inbuilt, you know. For example, in the case of, say genetic engineering, we do not know what the impact of genetic engineering will be till we have done the genetic engineering and a generation has appeared. And when they have deformities or they die young or whatever, then we will know that, yeah, but till such time that happens, we'll have to live with that ignorance. So ignorance will become a major part of this post-novel times period that we are going through, and we'll have to learn to live with ignorance as well. Different varieties of ignorance.
Thank you for that. So maybe for the last question, it's a bit of a long one, but it is from Alawi Masood, who is listening in on this. I will just read his question. I wanted to ask about the development of our normal and how our current society is unraveling it. From my understanding, it seems that our society, our normal, is based on Enlightenment European values, humanism setting the self first, utilitarianism and materialism, etc. These Enlightenment values were spread through pretty violent means, specifically colonialism, which then gradually transformed to globalization. These European values have strong contradiction between theory and practice. Utilitarianism doesn't seem true with the expressed racism in our globalization society. Humanism seems fake with the justification of defunding of arts in our schools. Materialism seems unreal when our sciences have been decided by funding. The sugar industry vilifying fat, or psychological replication crisis, etc. It seems that these contradictions exist and our complex society is unraveling them. Do you see this as true, as these postmodern times, as a direct response to your European values, or do you feel that this is a specific period with its own timeline?
First of all, I agree with a great deal of normal, that great deal of what we take as normal is essentially the normal of Western civilization. Individualism, all the things, Enlightenment values, all the things that were mentioned. So that normal, those paradigms are not totally fake. And I will include in those paradigms, not just modernity, but also postmodernism. Postmodernism was itself presented as a theory of salvation, right? It is supposed to rescue us from modernity. And postmodernism itself is a major problem. It is also what we regard as normal. So we regard absolute relativism as normal nowadays, and hence the emergence of post-truth. A lot of things associated with postmodernism are also problematic in that sense. So the normal then we have to transcend is largely the normal of Western civilization, but it's also normal of traditional cultures. It's not just the West, it's also the normal of Chinese culture. I mean, if power shifts from America to China, and China becomes even more imperialistic than America, then that's hardly a step forward for mankind or for humanity, in a sense. Some of the Western normals have been internalized and have become part of the conceptual and mental framework of traditional societies of India, for example, of many Muslim countries, and China, and even South America, etc. But there is a problem. As I said earlier on, that complexity, when complexity arrives at a certain level, societies begin to reach a point of diminishing return, things fall apart and they collapse. Yeah. But there were regional societies, there were individual civilizations. The problem with current Western civilization, that it is a global civilization. If the West goes down, we go down with it. The planet goes down, not just we go down with it, the planet goes down with it. So we are in a real bind here. We have to rescue ourselves, we have to rescue the West as well, in that sense. That's the dilemma. And we have to actually see ourselves as a globalized society, which is moving closer to edge of chaos. And I said, the essential choice we have once we reach the tipping point is that either we collapse or we go into a new order. The question now is, how do we create the new order? And I think we have to take the West with us in creating the new order, in a sense. Scott, do you want to say something here?
Yeah, I'll kind of add to that. The notion of normalcy is very interesting, and within our group, we've been discussing this a lot, particularly with the COVID-19 and some of the things that have been being trudged up with that. And normalcy itself is a very, it has a colonialist nature, a globalizing nature. And I think it's something that kind of crosses cultures, this want for there to be a normal. That's why we create tradition and culture and language and social structures. We want there to be some level of organization, although the word organization has very Western roots within it, so I don't want to necessarily say it's all Westernized in that respect. But Western culture in and of itself has a very disciplining nature to it. And so other cultures and traditions can take bits and pieces of Western civilization that they think are very nice or utile for their particular, whatever they need to get out of it. And because of that, it pervades and it invades lots of elements of society. That's why you can see Coca-Cola all over the world. That's why you can see a Starbucks at almost every street corner. And because of that, you have to really kind of take a step back and ask yourself the question of, am I making choices for myself, or are my choices already being predetermined for me? And this gets us kind of into the future studies aspect of it, and where we can kind of decolonize our future is a common phrase that's being used, and pursue a more pluralistic approach and getting more people's ideas and opinions on various matters and going towards a more preferred future. And maybe, and we had mentioned the concept of attacking that, the normal's the problem, right? And you can look at certain aspects. So I think capitalism is a good example of this. And it's like capitalism has a nature to it that it will perpetuate itself into oblivion if it needs to. It will eat, it literally is the snake eating its own tail. It will kill humans to make profit, but it needs humans to make profit. There's all of these internal contradictions within the concept of normalcy itself. And so I would also add that too. Let's see it.
Well, thank you so much. If we have any other questions, please send them in the chat. Otherwise, that was a great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
If I may add one more thing, if you're interested in kind of keeping this going, again, the websites I mentioned, cppfs.org, will give you some resources, as well as the Postnormal. It's postnormaltim.es is the website, and in there there's actually a series that a few of our colleagues, Jordi Serra, Christopher Jones, and Liam Mayo worked on, that is the Postnormal Perfect Storm. And then we have COVID Chronicles that feature writings from some of our other friends and colleagues talking about COVID-19 specifically, but also just looking at post-normal times in everyday life, and that can kind of help keep the discussion going, and we always welcome any further questions.
Thank you. And before everyone leaves, if I could just ask you to please sign up for the IIIT newsletter on the IIIT website's homepage, and then also follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much, Mr. Scott Jordan and Dr. Ziauddin Sardar, for being here and for leading this discussion. And thank you everyone for listening and for your questions. I hope that it was beneficial for everyone.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you, everybody. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.